Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back to this particular class which will talk about behavioral and cognitive method. So, I will take some example. So, in a particular case, so what it says that interview output based on an analysis of using a typical in-car radio castle machine. Okay. So, here we are talking about in-car radio castle machine. So, in this particular case we had three major section that we talked about in the interview. There may be many things. Okay. However, based on our aim and objectives of this study, we selected only three. First one was related to the visual clarity, second was the consistency, and third one was the compatibility. Okay. Based on that, we had some sections and we derived our questions only here. Okay. So, if it is structured, semi-structured or unstructured does not matter, but our all questions for this particular interview float around only these areas. So, first one was visual clarity, then second is the consistency, and then compatibility. Okay. So, if something else comes during the interview process, we have easy option to exclude them. Okay. It may happen that the subject who is responding to towards the question on this field may introduce some new information. Those information for this particular research may not be useful. However, maybe it is useful for some other research or it can lead to some other direction. But for this case, we have very specific 3 points, 3 agenda points. We will be discussing that only while analyzing the data. However, if it is a semi-structured or unstructured interview, we can have information, we can gather information, we can record the information, however, we will not be able to use it. Okay. That way we can use our interview data. So, some related method also I will talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the questionnaire. So, interviews are very closely related to the questionnaire as I mentioned. If it is a structured interview, it is very similar to the questionnaire. However, there are very specific differences that we can discuss in some other forum. So, questionnaire can take many forms, but they can be thought of as an extreme form of structured interview as I mentioned. So, there are some advantages and disadvantages. Let me tell you the advantages of questionnaire. It can be completed on paper by the participant, very important thing. So, you give the questionnaire, they will answer you on the paper itself, or nowadays in the through internet you can collect data. So, enabling huge sample of data collection with relatively minimal effort on the part of the experimenter, very important. Okay. Whereas, there are some disadvantages. So, it is concerned the inflexibility of the questionnaires and the inability to pursue interesting lines of inquiry or follow up on the answer that may be unclear. Okay. Whereas, this is possible in the interview. So, clearing the doubts, that is possible in interview, whereas in the questionnaire it is not really possible. So, observation can be used in conjunction with the post trial interview output to corroborate the benefits and the problem with the products particular design, whereas the interview reveals subject's opinion and perception of the product usability. The observation really demonstrates the actual errors and performance time when the person is using that particular device. So, now you can understand how the observation, interview and the questionnaire, these three things are connected with each other. Okay. We can have, based on the requirement, based on the aim and objective of my study, I can decide which component to choose and where to introduce it. Okay. Hopefully, you understood it. Okay. So, what we need if we want to collect information through through interview. So, the interview is relatively a very simple tool and can largely be conducted as a pen and paper exercise. However, in current scenario, whatever interviews we conduct, we try to do a videotape, so that it becomes very easy for us to analyze it and there is less chance to lose any data. So, audio recording also possible, video recording is also possible. So, in summary, we can say the purpose of interview is to gather key basic information about the circumstances and give a concise guide to its content. It is very important. It gives a very precise information about that particular content, and it is qualitative research technique. So, how do we use the data for our statistical treatment or for our further data analysis? We should be very clear before we introduce this tool for our data collection. Okay. So, let us move to the next, which is known as verbal protocol analysis. Okay. What it says? The purpose of verbal protocol analysis is to make valid inferences from the discourse content. Very important, okay? Valid inferences, okay, which is really valid for our objective. So, from a discourse content, we should find out these valid inferences. That is the agenda for the verbal protocol analysis. So, in human factor application, this discourse is a written transcript. Normally, it is a written transcript, can be found either within the individual words or word senses, phrases, sentences or themes. It is possible. Okay. So, we can have combination, we can have single. Okay. So, the analysis proceeds by extracting this valid content and then categorizing. Okay. You have to do a categorization. Once we find the valid content from all this, we should categorize them and define those categorization scheme. Very important. Okay. So, we have a set of words, set of sentences, phrases, theme. From that, we have to create the baskets. We have to create the baskets, and then you should understand that where these, does this basket mean, what this basket mean. Okay, you have to correlate how they are connected with each other. So, that is verbal protocol analysis. So, this analysis is a means of data reduction, very important. It is a means of data reduction, of keeping the content derived from the verbal transcript. It is a reducing the size, that is why it becomes manageable. It becomes easy for you to handle the data. So, that is the major purpose for the verbal protocol analysis. Little more about it. So, verbal protocol analysis is used within human factor research as a means of gaining insight into the cognitive underpinning of the complex behavior. Okay. So, when behavioral analysis are there, we really need to understand what are the interconnections, what are the influences, what are the relations available. So, from this particular tool we may get a direction. So, in human factors setting, verbal protocol has been shown to be a good exploratory method. Okay. So, it helps you to explore the situation, it helps you to explore the behavior of a person in a particular setup. Okay. If you design the experiment very carefully, it may give you an optimized reliability and validity of the situation. Okay. So, within the context of exploring this particular hypothesis and conducting studies in a naturalistic setting, verbal protocol analysis can be extremely useful. So, it's depend how you are going to analyze the data. If it is being it is being used in the context exploration, then it becomes very useful for the researcher to get a further lead. Definitely it has some advantages. So, it provides rich data source in quantity and in content. As I mentioned, it summarizes the data, right. It reduces the size of the data. So, it gives some content, very valid and solid content. So, the process lends itself well to examining the behaviors in a naturalistic setting. So, in a particular workspace, when suppose somebody is really working in a particular working setup, original setup, natural setup. So, how the behavior is, how the informations are we are collecting from their behavior. So, it becomes very connected to the original setting, right. So, this tool actually help us to get such data, and once we get some natural data like which is very much connected to the original work setup, the implementation of the design or implementation of the intervention becomes very useful and very unique. Okay. So, one setup to another setup, it is very unique in that case. So, content and outcomes of thinking can provide an insight into cognitive process. Of course, it helps because we are actually analyzing the behavior, whereas in observation it is very physical in nature. You really count the numbers of the movement, you count the frequency of any particular action or error, whereas this verbal protocol, how person is using this, it gives understanding about the perception of the situation, understanding about the situation. Of course, sometimes who are the expert in this particular field will give you excellent data, whereas as I mentioned the novice researcher may not be really good in this field. You should practice it, you should follow many research papers or research studies for this, and then you get skilled. Once you are skilled, then definitely you can have good data using this particular protocol. However, there are some disadvantages. It is a time consuming protocol, so it needs lot of time. Also analysis also very much time consuming, not only data collection, data analysis also very time consuming. It provides verbal commentary and that can change the nature of the task, especially if certain processes are not normally verbalized. Okay. So, some skilled work, some skill job which is really difficult to narrate, difficult to explain, for those cases this protocol is not a good tool. We should not go for this type of tool in that case. There are theoretical issues, definitely it is being mentioned in different literature that it is really not really valid tool in some cases. So, it is absolutely depend that which situation you are going to analyze or evaluate using verbal protocol. You please check back the similar literature. If literature says yes, In such cases verbal protocol is useful, then go for it, otherwise it is advised that you should not use this verbal protocol. So, it is very very important that you should understand what is the background of this particular research area. Okay. So, depending on the occupation, depending on the activity, depending on the task that you are going to evaluate, you are going to use verbal protocol or not, you have to decide. Okay. So, it is not that everywhere it is useful. In some cases it is very useful, in some cases it is not. So, before you choose this tool, you should go for the literature. So, this is the process, I mentioned it as a step 1, step 2, step 3. In step 1, so what you do, you actually check the device scenario, then instruction and you give training on that particular step, you use protocol, then use the recording, you follow the recording. Once you collect the information, so once you finish this recording stage, what you do, that here it comes the data reduction. So, once you have whole data, then you start grouping them, okay, group 1, group 2, group 3 in or maybe many more, okay, some categories you do, and once you do that using your the content of the verbal protocol, what you do, you give the transcription. Okay. Once you give the transcription, then you do encoding. Okay. You give some kind of nomenclature. Okay. Small typical nomenclature you can give. Suppose I am talking about example, I am talking about using a hand spray. Okay. So, how do I use it? So, when I am using it, only pushing. So, in pushing, like pressing, maybe in pressing, how I am going to do that. So, for all this detail, you can have varieties of information, you can group them and you can keep it as a single component. So, you encode them, okay, and later you can devise with the other data. Once you devise them, you have group 1, group 2, group 3, like that you can find the relation with the group 1, group 2, group 3, or group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, something like that type of relation you can establish. Now, here which relation to be established, which content should be connected with which content, it absolutely depend on the objectives that you have set for your research work. Okay. So, here there is no guideline that how do you analyze, how do you go for the statistical method. Okay. So, it is not possible. So, you have to have your own understanding, based on that you can take this grouping ahead. Okay. So, you can have the small scale pilot study. Once it is done, you can then analyze this particular data. So, this is the basic major steps that you can follow for verbal protocol analysis. So, I will give you detail that what are the steps. So, first is the devise a scenario. What you will do, involve some set task which is already set. Okay. Now, here it should be connected to your research. A particular task scenario, okay, a particular task scenario need to be framed properly, and the operation of one type or different types of equipment or a particular system. So, you set the whole scenario initially, then instruct and train the participant. It is very important, because if the participant do not know that what to do and how to do, they will not be able to help, they will not be able to perform the task. So, you instruct and train the participant correctly. So, the form of telling the participant what thing they should be talking about and informing them to keep taking even if what is being said does not seem to make much sense to them. It's very funny, right? So, if they it says that it is not really very connected to them, however, you should inform them, yes, this is the thing you have to do, this is the thing you have to talk. So, experimenter should demonstrate the method to the participant initially, showing them the desired form and content of the verbalization, very important. Okay. So, in which form they are actually looking for it, they should inform it beforehand. Standard instruction and training should be provided to the participant. So, it is not that for one participant 1 it is different and participant 2 it is different, it should be standardized. So, before you go for the data collection, you set all those things, train the subjects, and then you start the train means give the instruction, okay. Then you start the process. So, record the scenario. How do we do that? Maybe audio recording with a time index, it is possible. Sometimes digital recording products also can be used. So, portable computers also sometimes useful. It can be helpful to simultaneously record video to back and up to the verbal commentary, it is possible. A good method is to collect the data digitally via laptop. It is very useful because nowadays that is the way how do we collect data. Other data of interest like eye tracking data or system telemetry, all these things can be recorded simultaneously, that will be objectively informed on exactly how the system is being used. So, you should inform that, okay. It should be informed to the subject previously. This can often be useful to counterpoint the verbal data supplied by the participant. Now, the step 4, transcribe that verbalization whatever is happening. So, how do we do that? After collecting that verbal data, so participants is giving you the whole set, the whole narratives, right. So, once you collect it, it need to be transcribed verbatim into written form, okay. So, first is the audio recording or video recording, right. So, you listen and then you will transform it. So, a spreadsheet can be devised to do this particular process. The rate of verbalization for relatively fast paced text can easily reach up to 130 words per minute, it is possible. However, it is not mandatory, there will be some changes. A good technique for accurate and rapid time indexing is pause the audio recording after hearing a section of speech, note that particular time, subtract 2 seconds, type of verbalization at this new time point. So, that way you can do the transcribe, okay. So, then you encode it. How do you do that? Decide whether to encode word or encode sentences or phrases or sentences or theme, which one. So, based on the research objective research interest, you can encode any one of them. You should establish the conceptual framework for encoding this particular scheme. Devise the encoding instruction, because you are not only the person who are going to use it, maybe your co-researcher also going to use it. So, you should give the device for encoding this instruction and then complete the encoding. So, decide whether to encode word, sentences or phrases. So, how do we differentiate them? So, if it is word, encoding the occurrence of discrete word. Okay. If we are talking about only encoding the word, then we should encode the discrete word. If it is word sentences, then encoding the words with multiple meaning, a single word with multiple meaning. If it is phrases, then what we will do? encoding the phrases that constitute a semantic unit. If it is a sentence, then encoding of what particular sentences refer to what or refer to something, some expression, right. So, that is very critical, this really needs your experience. Then is theme, encoding the meaning of phrases and sentences into shorter thematic units or segment. Normally, we try to go for this portion, this becomes very easy, like thematic encoding. So, when we are getting the verbal protocols, the whole data, we try to categorize them under small theme. So, a protocol analysis based on the theme provides a richest and most flexible source of data, as I was saying. It is very useful when we go for the theme and can be recommended as a starting point of next part of the research. So, theme is very important when we go for this type of data collection. So, then what we do, establish a conceptual framework for the encoding scheme. The theme then have to be encoded according to some rationale determined by the research quotient, because you have pre-established research quotient. So, accordingly you have to set them, according to that rationale you have to set them. So, the encoding scheme could be based on the established theories of mental workload or cognitive control or situational awareness, anywhere, right. So, whatever themes, whatever encoding you are getting, you have to establish them, you have to connect them with something which is already established. Okay. So, this involves, so here no, you need to go back to the literature, you have to connect them again, repeat, relook into it. So, this is a very detailed process. Okay. It never happens very quickly. So, beforehand you should learn some literature. Also, once you have your themes ready, again you go back to literature and check for the different types of method or models available or not. So, this involves attempting to ground the encoding scheme according to some established theory or some kind of method or approaches. Okay. So, then what you do? You devise the encoding instruction. How do we do that? The next step is to draw up highly defined written instruction for the encoding the scheme, because if you do not have that, then it becomes very difficult in the next phase. How do you take it further, right? Given a length of time it can take to encode data of this particular sort, these instructions should be constantly referred to, and this in turn will help to ensure inter-rater reliability or within rater reliability. These same instruction will be used for when inter-rater reliability has to be established in the latter stage. Then you complete it. How do you do that? An encoding worksheet is produced at this particular step. So, earlier you are listing them, you are detailing them, here you are creating the worksheet. It should be determined whether the encoding categories should be mutually exclusive or exhaustive. Okay. Mutual exclusivity need not to be applied, it is not always, and the theme can fit into as many encoding categories as defined from the written encoding instruction. Okay. So, it is very iterative process, you need to really learn it in detail. Okay. So, under this scheme the encoding is very much exhaustive. Whenever a theme meets the definition described in the encoding instruction, initially how do you encoded them? The number 1 is entered in the relevant encoding box, and then you start for 2, 3, 4 and like that. Okay. Now, you complete it. So, how do you do that? So, various computer programs exist to assist in encoding the verbal transcript. So, there are different packages available. Here I mentioned few, however, you may have your own as well. Okay. The next step is devise the other data columns after transcribing the verbal data against that time index and having encoded the themes. The final part of worksheet consists of the other data column. This is an opportunity to note any mitigating circumstances that may have occurred during the trial. It is very important, right. So, you really get a detailed view of it, and that may have affected the verbal report. It is also may be useful to note different stages of task enactment or to tie up telemetry or eye tracking data with the verbal protocol, because that definitely we do, and we will have a lab practice where we will be really doing all this. Okay. So, how do we connect them or integrate them with the eye tracking system? How do we telemetrically we see them, okay, using separate worksheet column? Establish the inter and intra-rater reliability, and then perform the small scale pilot study. So, once you have all these things, you really do a pilot study. So, what do you do? The protocol analysis procedure should be put to the test within the context of a small pilot or pilot run, and this will demonstrate whether the verbal data collected are useful or not, whether the encoding system works or not working, whether the inter and intra-rater reliability are satisfactory or not satisfactory. So, this pilot study definitely helps you to give an understanding your data process, that the collection is correct or not, and then you analyze the structure of encoding, because what you did in the encoding process, now you have small groups, right, you have reduced the data. Now, you can have an understanding and you can have the building to those themes. So, what you do after conceptually grounded the encoding scheme by relying on established theories, because literature you are connecting back to the models or theories available or the construct, and having established inter-rater reliability through the use of the encoding instruction and inter-rater reliability. First one is the intra-rater and the next is the inter-rater reliability by employing independent encoders. Okay. Here you should introduce the independent encoder. The structure of encoding is to be analyzed. The analysis will proceed contingent upon the research question at hand, because you already have your research question, how they are connected, but all analysis need to sum the responses given in each encoding category. So, you have 2, 3, 5. So, each portion will have separate, okay, each portion will have separate group, and this will help you to achieve by adding up the frequency of occurrence, and which you can note it down for each group or each subcategories, and that will help you to understand the whole situation. So, this is an example. First one, devise a scenario. What we did, performance of a normal driver in a driving simulator. It is a example which is being taken from a book. So, what they have done here, instruction and train the participant. So, in that case the driver were instructed with the proper verbal information by instruction. Then second, the entire instruction and experiment was recorded by the videotape. Then what, that transcribe and verbalization, how they have achieved the 2-second incremental time index, the actual verbalization provided by driver's verbal commentary, and the encoding categories, event column and protocol structure. These were all illustrated, and this is how all these things being recorded. So, you can give the numbering, encoding like this, and you can record them. You can say this one here, here, here. So, like that you can have a data sheet. Okay. So, encode the verbalization, the encoding group was defined. Majorly here they did with the behavior, cognitive process and feedback. Okay. And the behavior group were like driver's own behavior, behavior of the vehicle. So, they gave the nomenclature differently, behavior of the road environment and other traffic, and cognitive process also, perception, comprehension, projection and action execution. That way they gave the nomenclature, okay, collectively. Then again definitely what they did, they encoded the verbalization. So, what they did here, the feedback category offered an opportunity for the vehicle feedback to be further categorized according to whether it referred to the system or control dynamics. So, either system dynamics or control dynamics or to the vehicle instrument. Okay. So, how that is happening? So, that feedback categorization happened. The cognitive process and the feedback encoding categories were couched in relevant theories in order to establish a conceptual framework. The event column was for noting road events from the simultaneous video log, and the protocol structure was colored coded according to the road type, being road type of road, like it's based on the terrain, okay, one traveled. So, devise the data column. So, mitigating the event, how it happened and stages of task enactment. So, there are some related protocols from these verbal protocol analysis. We can have some related protocol. Of course, observation is very much connected. The modification of this particular method and the addition of an ongoing verbal protocol will turn to the observational study. So, it's very much connected with each other. Also, observational method or task analysis can be helpful in discriminating the theories, specific scenario and the hypothesis that we are actually talking about in our research. Of course, eye tracking. Eye tracking is a very important instrument or a very important connected method that we can use with this verbal protocol. If we talk about the reliability and validity, reliability for the verbal protocol analysis is it's really high, it's very high, because it gives you quantitative data, it's very high. So, even using a theme based analysis, if you are using a theme based analysis, given a theoretical ground encoding scheme and provide that the same encoding instructions are used. So, it's very highly reliable. In terms of validity, there is a still degree of debate in terms of relationship between the verbalization and the content recognition. Okay, there is some kind of difficulties, and verbalization reflecting the content and outcome of the thinking are argued to possess theoretical validity, and validity is also aided by ensuring some degree of construct validity. So, here lot of statistical treatment you should take up to take this particular data ahead. Okay. Tools you can understand. What are the tools are required for this type of for this technique? So, protocol analysis requires the experimental scenario. So, you should build the experiment beforehand and some means of recording the audio against this time index measure in particular seconds. So, you need this type of setup. More efficient mean of conducting the analysis can employ digital audio or videotape as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes software based video players allow direct storage and no access it to the latter half, and it is the most convenient choice of transcribing the verbalization. Of course, some kind of spreadsheet packages also is helpful because you really need to store the data. So, it's not a big deal, it's like very easy, you can use your Excel file to collect those type of information. So, in summary we can simply say the verbal protocol can be used to understand how the operator perceives, operates and use a system, product or space. So, the whole thing, the whole concept, if we are talking about the if we are talking about the situation, if we are talking about a particular workstation, workplace or product analysis or system analysis, we can really understand the how the operator is behaving, how the information they are perceiving. So, it is a very useful tool in terms of cognitive ergonomics. Okay. Till here for today, and maybe we will continue further in the next class. Thank you.